what comes back to the browser gets dumped to the eval statement of JavaScript. Who here knows what the eval statement in JavaScript is? The eval statement basically says, look, I'm going to give you a string. It's got some code in it. Please execute it. That should scare the pants off anybody here. Here's some code. Please execute it. If I can man in the middle you, if I can even get even a slight little input into your session, I can make your browser execute arbitrary code. And we just saw that I can port scan with arbitrary JavaScript. So that's a really interesting setup. You can grab XML, and the bridge could also actually return to the JavaScript in the AJAX running on the client. You know, here's a raw Flash object, which I then add to the DOM, or here's a raw XML, which I can then parse. Maybe it's a data island. It's basically it's just a sewer pipe. It's give me, I can ask for anything, and the bridge can go get anything on my behalf, and then give anything back to me. It's incredibly versatile. And that's why it's a problem, because we're exploiting the trust of mashups. Everybody loves mashups. My God, there's $1,500 conferences about the joys of mashups. Now, don't get me wrong, I love them. Mashups are basically sites aggregating third parties. There's a site, Housing Maps. Everyone heard of housingmaps.org? It's a site that takes Google Maps and lets you take Craigslist apartment listings. So it's using the API of Craigslist and the RSS feeds from Craigslist, and it's accessing the Google Map API and will map apartments on top of Google Maps. Everybody here heard of chicagocrime.org? This is really great. It takes Google Maps and the public crime statistics of Chicago, and instead of that nice little thing that says, oh, your destination is here, it's like, yes, there was information theft here and armed robbery here. What they really need is yet a third aggregate site which takes the crime data from Chicago and apartment listings, overlays the two, so you can say, like, find me things where, misdemeanor, vandalism or whatever hasn't occurred in the last 6 months. So, and if you do that, please, 3% royalties, I think is fair. So any web service is fair game here. Here's the beautiful thing, though. Any commercial use normally requires a formal agreement. Anybody right now can go sign up to access Yahoo API or the Google Maps API. If they're using it for a commercial product, you and, say, Google have to enter into some type of formal agreement. Now, this is beautiful. These formal agreements carry some type of trust. I mean, because if I'm Housing Maps and here's Google, why would Housing Maps ever try to hurt me? I mean, you're going to access me. The aggregator agrees it will and will not do certain things. There's stuff about how many unique queries I'll make, what's the throughput, what's the bandwidth. The bridge provides a hole to circumvent most of these rules, because what's happening now is, maybe Housing Maps and Google have made an agreement that they'll only do so many transactions a day, and they won't try to attack each other, and they'll, enrich shareholder value. I always love that phrase. But with a bridge, if let's say Housing Maps had a bridge, they actually don't, but if they did, they are now proxying requests to me. And unless they validate the input going to that bridge, unless they try to do stuff to lock that bridge down, I can get around all those things that Housing Maps said of, oh, we'll never SQL inject you or anything like that. Well, I never made that agreement. Of course I'm going to try to SQL inject you. And bridges really allow malicious users to exploit this trust. Whoa. So there are security issues with bridges, obviously. It's an open proxy, but it only goes one place. It's going to go to, at billiesbooks.com, it's an open proxy to amazon.com, and it only goes there. There are no built-in security mechanisms into any of the bridges. There's no throttling, the number of times the bridge will clamp after so many people ask it, the same user asks it a bunch of requests. There's no authentication, there's no authorization, and there's no obfuscation of what's actually being sent and what's coming back. It relies on other components for the security. It requires SSL. You've already done a web form. I've already issued a session cookie. I mean, it doesn't do any of this stuff itself. It relies on other mechanisms. Well, good Lord, we've already seen those other mechanisms don't work very well now, do they? Because traditional web apps, we've got 70% of attacks coming through the application layer. So this is yet another input that attackers can try to attack you through. Like we said, we've seen how well this works. There are so many attack vectors against an AJAX bridge. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. Dumping a database through a bridge. So let's say I wanted to dump out Amazon's bookstore. I wanted to dump out their author's database. I could go download and sign up for a free key to access their API. And it would probably be extremely limited. I could probably only ask it 250, maybe 500 questions a day. They probably throttle the bandwidth, so it comes back kind of slow. There's no quality assurance guarantees. But let's say I had a book lover site, Billy's Books, Well, chances are Billy's Books and Amazon, when they entered a more formal agreement, Billy's Books has hundreds of users, hopefully thousands. That would be great. You know, if it's got all those users, obviously BillysBooks.com needs to make more unique queries to Amazon.com's web services than I need to make. So these kind of you know, things that are allowed, more simultaneous connections, higher bandwidth limits, more unique queries. So what this means is that if I wanted to extract out all the authors of Amazon.com, if I signed up myself, I could get maybe 500 a day. I go through BillysBooks.com and say, hey, Billy's Books, I want knowledge about this about this author. And Billy's Books goes and talks to Amazon on my behalf. I could dump potentially thousands of authors in a day. So it actually makes sense for an attacker to use an AJAX bridge to dump a database than trying to do it directly. Now, this is the funny thing. Any performance enhancements that BillysBooks.com does only ends up helping me. If, you know, let's say the aggregate site, Billy's Books, has some type of cache. Well, if it's caching these queries, every time I ask it an author, if that author's in the cache, that's one less query it's got to go make to Amazon. And that's it comes back to me twice as quickly. So any performance increases only means I get more authors and I get them faster. Did you have a question? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Certainly. I assure you, I haven't had a bunch of coffee today. 10? Excellent. Okay. I'll tell you what, I apologize I talk so fast. We're actually almost done with bridges. Could I speak with you afterwards because I still have one more section? Thank you. The other thing you can do with a bridge is I can attack a third-party site through the bridge. So, you know, I have BillysBooks.com with a web service. It's going to relay all my attacks to Amazon. So instead of attacking Amazon directly, I send the request to Billy's Bridge, and Billy's Bookstore sends the attack to Amazon. At the most basic thing, let's say Google, or well, in this case, Amazon notices that Billy's Books is trying to SQL inject them. At the very least, Google goes and contacts Billy's Books, or Amazon contacts Billy's Books and says, dude, what are you doing? And in which case, BillysBooks.com goes and looks at its logs and goes, wow, all right, let's go track down this guy. But that's another layer I can hide behind. At the very most basic advantage for a hacker with an AJAX bridge is that it's another layer to hide behind. Let's say that there's an auto-shunning or an IDS between BillysBooks.com and Amazons.com. And let's say this IDS notices a SQL injection attack. Well, the IDS is probably, or the IPS is probably going to say, I'm going to clamp this IP address for 3 minutes and not let them make any queries because they're trying to attack me. I tried to SQL inject Amazon.com, and instead I've done a denial of service attack against all of BillysBooks.com because it can no longer talk to Amazon's books. So, you know, if I'm just trying to cause mischief, again, the attacker wins here. It's an unintended consequence, but I still managed to cause a lot of damage by going through a bridge as opposed to attacking directly. Now, this is the interesting thing. What happens if Amazon doesn't even notice the attack at all? And this might make sense, because if I'm a large site like Amazon.com, excuse me, Amazon.com, and I have a lot of affiliates, you know, BillysBooks.com, you know, FrenchBooks.com, you know, CanadianBooks.com, and all of those people are making bunches of requests a day, chances are that I'm going to just go, look, I don't have time to do the same input validation against these affiliates that I do against just regular people contacting me. Besides, we already have a formal agreement not to attack each other, so I'm going to, just for performance reasons, subject those requests to less analysis. So what this means is it's possible that an attack could only work if I go through a SQL bridge, or an AJAX bridge, because the end site is performing less validation on things coming from affiliates than regular people. So there are some layers of indirection here. I'm actually not going to go into this, but basically a bridge can kind of, if I have a web service that's called, like, you know, search for, you know, Billy's Books or Billy's Golf Books, and I just accept an author name. Maybe the variable names and the data types that I use on my web service are different than the one Amazon does. So if I just directly forward the data, it won't work. There might be a little translation layer where they say, oh, this is the author name. That's actually supposed to be writer's name when I contact Amazon. So there's a little bit of translation that goes on there. It's possible that error messages, when I SQL inject Amazon, that come back, Billy's Books will filter them before it goes back to the client. Well, luckily, we have a whole study and a lot of history on how to attack machines when you're not getting error messages back. Please reference blind SQL injection. I unfortunately am running a little behind. I don't have time to go into it here. But we already know how to attack sites when error messages are being suppressed. So hype surrounding AJAX. Web 2.0 is almost like another bubble. I mean, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, so don't hold me to this, but there's a lot of money in the air. MySpace got purchased by News Corp, Rightly got purchased by Google, Delicious, Facebook. I gotta imagine the gall of these guys. These guys are college students, they created this site, and they turned down $700 million for it and said something like, nah, we were thinking more like 1.2 billion. So there's a lot of money in the air, and people are thinking, wow, I gotta get into web apps. There's a lot of buzzwords. This hype is really having a lot of effects. First of all, people are moving to client-side web applications for all the wrong reasons. They want to either appear trendy, they want to fight off perceived competitors, and just quite frankly, having a sexy new front end on your website is more pleasing to customers than you spending your time fixing your bug fixes. Your customers want it, and frankly, your programmers would probably rather be doing that than fixing security bugs. So, and sometimes just because they can, they'll do it. So what is this doing? It's driving inexperienced web developers into the space. There are these giant demands now of 5? All right, fantastic. There are these giant demands that are saying, look, we need web developers fast because we got to have this AJAX thing. I don't really understand it. Nobody really knows what Web 2.0 is, but I need to have it today. And so there's a lot of developers who don't necessarily know the nuances of web programming. They're novices to it. They may be experienced developers, but they're not experienced web developers. And as we've seen with validation and some of these other architecture issues, you really need to understand the nuances of web applications to be able to develop them securely. This really encourages cut and paste application development. I go to a blog, I want to implement something, I type it into Google, I find some forum site for software coders, finally some smart guy gives the answer, I copy the code, paste it into my application. I have no way of knowing whether that code was actually done by an expert or not. And indeed, because there are so many people coming into the field, the percentage of the total population of web programmers who are very, very knowledgeable about security is decreasing because there are more people coming into this field. Coincidentally, book developers and authors are saying, well, you know what? I need to write a book about AJAX or a book about web programming targeted at novices because that's the growing part of this market. And so more and more of these books have simplified examples. They're not necessarily teaching the best practices. And someone with a lot of experience will say, I'm already a programmer. I'm going to read this novice book about web programming, and now I'm going to go make a site. And that's kind of causing problems. I don't want to single anyone out. There's, one company that uses Teach Yourself. I just happen to use that because it's the first one they saw. You cannot learn anything in 24 hours. You can't. The only thing you can learn in it goes in short-term memory and then you lose it. The only thing you can learn in 24 hours is how to make a very, very dangerous web app that is not secure in any way, shape, or form and exposes your users to risk. And people who write these books should be ashamed of themselves. No, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. Seriously, this is really causing a problem because someone will read the book and say, I've had 15 years of programming experience. I understand this stuff. Okay, great. I got to the end of the book. There's nothing more to go. I'm going to go on. And because it's a shrinking population of people who are knowledgeable in this, technical FAQs, things like that, they're not including this more advanced knowledge. And you end up having moderately more intelligent novices helping out novices and not giving very good advice. I'm not trying to criticize anyone. I'm just saying this is irresponsible, and we need to. Novice books aren't bad. But we need to have books that are also aimed at, all right, here's how you secure it. I often laugh because the O'Reilly PHP, Securing PHP book is 107 pages. But those are the best 107 pages you can ever read about creating a